open book to Ray Leonard. Backs up against the ropes.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history of the sport.
The first loss. A tremendous victory. Leonard fighting off the ropes.
It happened. It happened. Uppercut by Douglas. Down goes Tyson.
Right hand shot.
Excellent. Knocks out by Tyson.
Slumps to the canvas.
The champion struggles to stay on his feet.
How do you like it? How do you like it?
Welcome, fight fans, to another episode of BTR's Legendary Nights. And it's me, Sean Bastow, your host as always, covering some of the greatest fights over recent boxing memory and historical boxing memory. But before we get in to this episode of the Legendary Nights, we want to talk about our sponsors for the podcast, which is Bear Attack Boxing, providing high quality boxing gloves and high quality boxing equipment on www.bearattackboxing.co.uk, and you can find them on social media at Attack Boxing on Twitter and Bear Attack Boxing on Facebook and Instagram. So go over there and check out the high quality boxing gloves that they're doing. They are endorsed by guys like Tyrone McKenna and Tommy McCarthy, and there's going to be more up and coming products in the near future. Also, before we go into this episode of Legendary Nights, I also want you to take a moment to go over and find us on any available podcasting app like Apple Podcasts or Podbean or Spreaker, Stitcher, Player FM, TuneIn. We're on every single one, and whichever one you choose to subscribe to us on, please go on there and leave us a comment, leave us a rating, leave us a review. All of this really helps us, and I always bang on about the fact we are independent. We truly are. We don't have a studio to do this in, so all these votes, all these ratings and reviews, they really help us get up where we need to be. So today's episode then, Legendary Nights, voted by you, the listeners and the users of Twitter. This is the tale of Froch versus Groves, number 1, and we're going to be talking today to Johnston Brown, who currently writes articles for Billy C Boxing. You can find Johnston's work at billycboxing.com, and you can find Johnston on Twitter at JohnOSE23. So make sure after you've listened to this episode, you go out there and you give him a follow, because he absolutely loves everything about boxing. He likes to write about great historical fights, so it was a perfect match getting him on for this Legendary Nights episode. So this is it, guys. This is the tale of Froch versus Groves, one of the modern day great fights that I'm really excited to be talking about. So sit back, if you're in work listening to it, sit back and enjoy this episode of BTR's Legendary Nights. This is the tale of Froch versus Groves. So I'm delighted to welcome on to Legendary Nights Johnston Brown. Johnston, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Hope you're well too, Sean.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm really looking forward to this episode. It's the tale of Froch versus Groves, the first fight, and we're going to be chatting about this particular fight. It's so fresh and so relevant given the fact that we've just seen a fight weekend and a punditry team that's involved both of these men, so it's really interesting to get this out this week and chat about this particular fight. And I know when I approached you about speaking about it, you was really excited because it's a fight you really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, massively. I was a Froch fan, and I was a Groves fan as well. So I was sort of in between when I watched the fight. I weren't too sure to cheer on. So with the build up, it sort of swayed my views a little bit on Carl Froch, especially because I thought he was a little bit arrogant, to be fair. But yeah, really good fight to sort of get your teeth into, and I really enjoyed the first one. Really, I actually think it's better than the second. I think most people probably will, but yeah, really good fight.
100% a great fight. This is, like you said there, I'll agree with you straight away when you say this was a better fight than the second one. And in terms of excitement, yeah, 100% absolutely, this was a better fight. I really enjoyed it. And what you were just saying then as well about the fact that I think this did actually sway a lot of people's influence over who they wanted to win in this fight with the build-up, and we're going to discuss that in the episode today. We're going to be discussing a little brief synopsis of the careers just leading up to the fights, as always, and then we're going to talk about the fight, and then we're going to talk about the aftermath. And I think this is a perfect fight, and this might not, in some people's minds, it might not be classed as a legendary night, but I think in recent British boxing memory, it's, for me personally, this is one of the greatest nights in boxing we've had recently for a long time.
And not only that, Sean, I actually think that if you think about, I mean, I've heard people sort of say that this is the fight that actually ignited the British boom. If you think about it, I mean, there was a slight boom going on before the actual fight, obviously, but with the way the fight went and with the way it was stopped, and then obviously progressing to the second, you know, from there, I mean, whoever thought 90,000 people would go and watch Groves Froch at Wembley Stadium? I mean, that there alone says that British boxing at that time was really starting to sort of go well, and it was gaining a lot of interest. So this was a really significant fight as well.
Yeah, no, 100% a significant fight. And we're going to talk about both fighters, like I said, synopsis of their careers going into it. And Froch at this point was a lot of people's favourite before the build-up of this fight, because what he'd achieved in boxing at this point in 2013 going into the Groves fight, it made him what he is today. It made him a warrior. It made him the guy with the granite chin. And we'll talk about that now and briefly touch on some of them fights. I mean, when he first really broke onto that world stage for me was when he beat Jean Pascal in 2008, when boxing was on ITV, when it was just ITV and you had Sky Sports and ITV, and I don't think there was anything else at the time as well. And this was one of them free-to-air fights that I really, really enjoyed, the Jean Pascal fight. Do you remember that?
I do, yes, I watched it. I did watch it, 2008, wasn't it? I watched it around a mate's house, actually. We're both cheering on Froch. And I think, do you know what, off the top of my head, this is just off the top of my head, was Calzaghe, was he retired by this point as well in 2008?
He'd just had his last fight the month before.
He had?
With Jones Jr.
I remember watching this fight thinking, because the rumour was possibly Carl Froch could fight Calzaghe, and obviously that didn't happen, but yeah, that's why that always sticks in my mind. And that was his first title, wasn't it? That was on the WBC.
That's the one, yeah, WBC.
WBC.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great fight, great 12-round war with Jean Pascal. He wins on a unanimous decision, and the next fight was even more dramatic against Jermaine Taylor.
What a fight that was! That you talk about legendary nights. That was an amazing fight, Jermaine Taylor. Great fight.
Yeah, how many seconds was that fight when he knocked him out with something like, I think it was like 10 or 12 seconds? I think
it was 10 seconds. It was 10 seconds. I'm sure it was. I remember. Yeah, 10 or 20 seconds, if that. I mean, yeah, it was unbelievable. He was down on points, and obviously. Taylor was. It's incredible, really. It shows how much of a warrior Carl Froch. I mean, that was probably for me a significant fight with Carl Froch that made me realise that this guy is a real warrior, and I love it. From that point, I followed him even more. So, like, watched every single one of his fights from that point. It's a fantastic fight against Jermaine Taylor, and what a comeback from him! Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was. It was a really great fight. I really enjoyed watching that. And then he went into the Super 6 tournament. The sort of the early version of the World Boxing Super Series. We had the Super 6 tournament with all the super middleweights involved, and then he went on and he beat Andre Durrell in Nottingham, and then he had that fight with Kessler, which he lost. That was the period of time where we had that horrible volcanic ash cloud as well, and he was struggling to get over to Denmark to actually fight him.
Yeah, and he lost that. He lost to Kessler the first one, which was a bit of a, it was a bit. I wouldn't say controversial, but it was very tight, and it could have gone either way. And then obviously it was after Abraham after that, wasn't it?
Yeah, after Abraham, yeah, he did a bit of a number on Abraham from what I remember. He's shown the blueprint of how to beat Abraham in that fight.
Yeah, definitely. It was excellent. Superb performance. One of his best performances, actually, Carl Froch. Like, flawless almost. Excellent.
He beats Glen Johnson, and then he faces Andre Ward in the final and loses in what was a very difficult fight for Carl Froch. And my memories of that fight were that he was outboxed for the majority of it, but towards the end he started to get through a little bit, maybe the last 2 or 3 rounds, and you started to wonder, is he going to be able to get through? And I think people were saying, this was a 15-round fight. He might have stopped Andre Ward. The thing was, he weren't going to beat him, was he? Andre Ward was just something special.
Yeah, I think that was the night that Andre Ward probably, it was quite significant in the way he was able to then just, for someone like Carl Froch to literally for 10, as you say, probably for 9-10 rounds he was outboxed. And I know there was a lot. Everybody sort of had Andre Ward the potential superstar, but that fight just sort of signified that for me. And it was. I was willing, like everyone else, that taught British boxing, Cole, to catch him with one, but it just wasn't to be. And then obviously, I mean, I know you probably want to move on, but Lucian Bute, yes. I mean, was that was one fight that will always stick with me, because he was so nobody give Froch a chance, really. I mean, I remember all the pundits saying, "No, Lucien Bute he's this fantastic fighter, and can't see Cole stopping him, and he's on the slide." And obviously, again, he performed he put a fantastic performance in against Lucien Bute.
Yeah, it was one of his greatest performances, to be honest. It was I think, if anything, regardless of the George Groves fights, which we're going to be talking about, this Lucien Bute fight, probably, along with the Groves fights, will probably be remembered as one of his career-defining performances, because the fact that you just said there, the way he came back from all the pundits literally putting him out, saying he's not going to win this. It was very reminiscent of when Sonny Liston fought Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali was told by all the pundits, "No, you ain't going to win this. Liston's going to win this. He's going to kill you. That's it. It's over." And Lucien Bute comes out and gets absolutely blasted out by Carl Froch. And
that showed for me as well with Carl Froch, because he was the underdog almost going into it. Although obviously Lucien Bute had come over to Nottingham to fight him, you could sort of see there was something about Cole that night, and even the build up to that, he was so tuned in. There was something about him that I felt that he's going to perform that night, and I didn't doubt him, and I just had this feeling, he had this glint in his eye, and as you say, he really did perform that night, and that is when Cole was at his best. When people were doubting him, he puts in a fantastic performance.
He did, and then he beat Youssef Mack via KO in Nottingham in the same year. Moving to 2013, we come to May, and we get the return bout with Mikhail Kessler, which was for his old WBA title and the current IBF title, which he held at that time. So he goes into that fight, and that again, this is another fight where you think to yourself, you think about wars, this was a war.
I actually took my wife to this one, Gemma. We both went to the O2, and we done really well, because we was, I weren't sure if we were going to get the tickets, because they all went pretty quickly. I think they sold out within like half an hour, and Gemma managed to work her magic and get us 2 tickets for the Kessler fight, Froch fight, and unbelievable. One of my favourite fights. I mean, in fact, that is probably the best fight I've actually seen live on a personal level, to be fair. Fantastic.
No,
great, loved it.
You couldn't have gone to a better fight, really, to be honest with you. I mean, as far as fights go, you want something like that, and I think for the casual audience, this was one of them fights where if you weren't a boxing fan and you were just tuning in because he was a friend of a friend who liked boxing, this would have got you into boxing because of the fight, because of the way they went at it for 12 rounds.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, I love a slugfest, and if you're gonna advertise boxing, I think a good old slugfest to the casual is always a good one, isn't it? Really, it gets them involved. Yeah, love it.
No, it does. And then obviously we come to George Groves, which we'll be talking about. So we'll move on to Groves then, and let's talk about Groves' career. And obviously, we both men are retired at this point, but Groves obviously started his career a little bit later on. He actually made his debut in the same year that Carl Froch won his first world title.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
There's a fact for you.
I knew of him and James DeGale, because I knew there was it was burning away when it was with them both in the amateur. And I think James DeGale had edged out George, didn't he, for the Olympics, which almost, I think that's where actually it all stems from, that rivalry between James DeGale and George Groves. And I think from then, that was when I was like, who's this George Groves? So, to be honest, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I first came across Groves when he fought Charles Adamu for the Commonwealth title, which was in 2010. So before that, he'd obviously been in his learning fights. So his fights against the Journeyman, the Road Warriors, he'd got all his learning fights in, and then came in 2010, where he really broke onto the scene, beating Charles Adamu for the Commonwealth title in Manchester. And that's really where I started to take note of him as a fighter. And then his next main fight, or his major fight, was with Kenny Anderson, which again was in Manchester, where he defended the Commonwealth super-middleweight title. The Kenny Anderson fight, Johnston, is that one that you recall?
I don't know, to be honest. No, I'm not going to lie. No.
Well,
no.
For people that obviously don't recall it, this was a fight where I think if you go back and watch it, you're going to look at it and think this is going to tell you a bit of a story about George's career, and it was a bit of foreshadowing to the way George's career was going to go, because because it was a little bit of a life and death fight for him. You know, he got up from an early knockdown to go on to stop Kenny Anderson in what was a thrilling fight, because they were both undefeated at the time. So that was a significant point in George's career. One more fight after that, and he goes in his first big main event against James DeGale.
Yep, yeah, that's the one I do recall very well. And we actually had one, didn't we, recently with Scott Fitzgerald and Anthony Fowler, in terms of two guys roughly around the same time, undefeated, produced a good fight, a bit like James DeGale and George Groves, a bit of rivalry as well. So yeah, and it was a close one. I mean, it's a majority decision in the end. I've got on here. So I when I first see the fight live, I actually think I had the Gal down as winning that fight, and then when I rewatched it a couple of times, I think Groves did win it in the end. So it was close, but I think George done enough.
Yeah, well, I watched the fight live. I remember watching it with a couple of my mates, and it was one of them fights where it was a very tactical, masterful performance, and it was obviously the influence of Adam Booth that James DeGale, George Groves, had in his corner that night to beat James DeGale. And you know, I was watching recently a little bit of a Sky Sports documentary they did with George, and he was talking about that fight. It was interesting that he said going into this particular fight he wasn't very comfortable with the tactics that were put in place for him for this fight. However, he went off obviously Adam's knowledge base, and it played out on the night. He stole the rounds away from James, and that's what essentially won him that fight. So that was quite a significant fight. And then he goes on in his fight after that and beats Paul Smith, a guy who went on to have way too many world title shots.
Oh, I mean, that showed he'd done him in 2 rounds as well. That was a bit of a shock for me. I wasn't expecting that, and especially after being in a hard fight against James, he produced a fantastic performance against Paul Smith, and that for me made me realise actually, George he's on a good roll here, and he could do something in this division. And then obviously, I think next one was it Francisco Sierra, and then Glen Johnson, which was another one I went to. I actually had to watch George Groves get Glen Johnson as well, which was it was a decent fight, but it was a good performance from George. Excellent performance, really, considering Glen Johnson is a tough guy, isn't he? But he was, he was obviously coming to the end of his career, but it was a good performance from George, and it was really starting to, it was flying up the rankings, and obviously we're getting to the point where he's in a position to fight for the world title.
Well, that's it. Like you say, he had a great performance against Glen Johnson, where people started to notice him even more. They were starting to talk about him more going onto the world stage. He had a couple of more fights, and then he got his fight for the World Boxing Association Intercontinental, all these little rankings belts that they have out there, that they still have today. That was one of the belts that got him on the rankings for the WBA title, which was held by Froch at the time. So that's essentially what helped him get that potential shot at Froch, was the fact that he had this opportunity. Now, we're going to be moving on to the build-up in a couple of minutes, because that, for me, was the best part. Not just the fight, but one of the best parts of it, and one of the best builds-up in recent years. That's what led to a lot of the comments in the build-up, because he was given this ranking. I can't remember what it was at the time, but he was given a ranking, and Froch didn't essentially have to give him this option to fight Groves. He didn't have to do this, but he did, and he felt like it was a time to give the young lion an opportunity, and he did. And I'll tell you what, although at the time he probably regretted it in that fight when he got knocked down, it was like this is a great opportunity for George Groves, a great opportunity. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about the build up. What are your memories of the build up in that fight?
I mean, I couldn't help but think about the Ben and Eubank for me when I was watching most of it, with sort of Carl Froch sitting on ringside. He wouldn't even look at George, and George just sort of staring at him, isn't he? Calling him Froch, and he was really starting to. You could see like Froch was he was really uncomfortable with it. It was almost like he wanted to just fight him. Then it was great to watch, and he really did wind him up. Although, for me, I still think Froch, in the back of his mind, I think he believed he was the better fighter, and sort of, although, you ranked him highly, and whether it be WBC, I think it's WBF as well. I'm gonna deal with you, mate, and then I'm gonna move on to whether it be maybe a Kessler fight or possibly the Andre Ward fight to sign off Froch's career. So for me, I think he overlooked him a little bit, but brilliant from George. Really, he got right in his head, and I mean, when we see the fight, obviously you could see, you know, he done something. He definitely upset Carl, and yeah, brilliant. How about yourself, Sean?
Well, I'll tell you what then. My memories of this fight, this build-up to this fight, were unbelievable because you said it at the top of the episode. You said this was a build-up which swayed people towards a certain fighter or away from a certain fighter, and in this instance, I was a massive Froch fan. I really enjoyed watching Groves, so I was very split like yourself at the time. But then watching this build-up actually turned a hell of a lot of people over to George Groves because of the fact that Carl Froch was being so overconfident that he was going to do a number on George Groves. It was unbelievable. And you talk about that episode of Ringside where they're both together.
If I want to say what I want to say, or if I do say what I want to say, it's going to end with you probably putting me in a headlock and Eddie putting George in recovery position.
Say it then.
Because that's what we'll go down. I don't want to go down that road.
What are you going to say?
But all I've got to do to answer your question is connect with a right hand or left hook, and the fight's going to be over. It's as simple as that. 100% that is what will happen. That'll be the outcome of the fight. George Groves is getting knocked out.
His chin won't stand up to your power.
Can't stand up to it. It can't. At some stage in the fight, I will hit him. When I connect, he will hit.
So that's it. You just got to land one punch.
Final message, Carl, before
you haven't looked at him at all.
Is that it, Carl? You just got to land one punch.
I've not. No, you've spotted that well.
One punch is that.
And you won't.
No.
Calm down, Carl.
Final message, George.
I'll put this chump asleep. We'll see.
You'll knock Froch out.
I will knock Froch out. I'll knock him out. He won't hear that final bell.
No one's come close to doing that yet, George.
No, there's people who have come close, and it's there. The blueprint has been written. There's many ways I can choose to do it, and I might choose to beat him in many different ways, and then I'll put him asleep.
1 more minute.
Johnny, how are you not laughing? Go on. What was you going to say?
You got 1 more minute.
You're finding this tough, aren't you?
Yeah, go on. Ask me another question.
You're going to cry? You're going to cry, aren't you? Don't cry. I can hear your voice breaking. What's that? Come on now.
Johnny, you were saying.
What?
Sorry, excuse. I apologise on George's behalf. Carry on, mate.
He's going to cry. Adam, is he going to cry? Are you okay?
What's happening right
now? Are you alright? What's
What's
happening?
Don't go. Right
Eddie's sitting here. He's sitting here, but he can't help you. You can ask for his reassurance now, but whether he storms the ring before the fight's over or not, he can't help you, Carl. I'm sorry. You're going to have to hold it together all by yourself.
The memories of it are fantastic because George Groves is absolutely badgering the hell out of Froch in that, and to the point where you can see it in his face. Froch is like, he's got this stare in his eyes. He looks like he's gonna either get really angry or cry, and you don't know which one it's going to be. And then he closes his eyes, and you can see he's probably thinking, what the fuck have I done here? And he's like, this just started off something that was fantastic. And then I was talking about it with you before we started. It was great, wasn't it? It was just like, this is exactly what you wanted. This is what you wanted out of a build-up to a fight. This is what really got casual audiences involved. This is what got people transitioning over from different sports as fans to come over to boxing and go, there's this fight with these two guys and they really, really hate each other. No, it's not fake. It's genuine bad blood. And to this day, I genuinely believe that was genuine hate between them back then.
Oh, you could see it on Saturday night when they're standing next to each other. When George is talking, sometimes you could sort of just see Froch just sort of glaring off somewhere else in the stand while George is talking. Because you can always see it. He doesn't want to listen to him. Although they've got to be professional, obviously. But it is genuine. And you do see nowadays where some other fighters will try to spice up their fight with stupidness, but this one was for real, and it definitely sort of, as you say, it got the fans coming from different sports and just the neutral fans sort of, I'll watch this fight tonight. And that was that for me, again, that was so significant for the British boxing boom at that time in 2013. It was really great to be a part of and sort of watching sort of thing.
Yeah, it certainly was. I think this was one of them fights that got, I watched it with my wife. My wife has always been a big boxing fan, and her dislikeness for Carl Froch came from that build up to that fight, and even to this day, even watching the punditry over the weekend with Froch and Groves involved in it, she still sat there and she's like, I can't stand Froch. it comes from that build up, because he was so cocky and so confident he was going to do a number on him, that it just made him look like a bit of an arse. It made him look like he'd overlooked him completely. And as we come onto the fight now, that for me, it told a massive story about the build up. Did Groves get under Froch's skin? Well, I think the answer was yes.
Yeah, I think he got under his skin, and I do think that Froch overlooked him. As I said, as we used to the Lucy and Bute fight just before that, the Carl Froch, when he was the underdog, if you like, going into that fight, that was the Carl Froch that should have gone in the initial fight against George and got under his skin and overlooked George. Thought, who's this young cocky kid who thinks he can start sort of mouthing off at me, how dare you type of thing. And, well, it was brilliant. He done a fantastic number on him. And I actually got to one point when I was watching that fight where I started to feel sorry for Froch, believe it or not, where I thought, he's just literally diminished. That was my initial thought as I'm watching the fight, especially the first 4 rounds. I was like, yeah, either George is having a fantastic performance, was performing fantastically, and Froch just, it was half the man, to be honest. It just didn't look like the Carl Froch we had witnessed against sort of all these, maybe I thought at one point maybe all these fights beforehand of, it's taking its toll on him and he's starting to, that was it. I thought this is it. It's the end of the card, to be fair.
It was a very, very, very good, thrilling and entertaining fight. And as we talk about the fight now, that first round in particular, you didn't know what to expect from that first particular round. I remember watching it back thinking, it's going to be quite a tentative opening start to the fight, and they're going to feel each other out. And next thing you knew, George Groves landed that right hand square on Froch's nose, and Froch was down. And you'd not seen Froch down before.
No, I thought, to be fair, I was surprised he actually got up, and lucky for Carl is that it was so late in that first round, because if that had been in the first sort of minute and a half, I think he could have been in trouble, and he could have even gone down again. Whether, I think he's, he's tried to go, I think he was losing the round, Carl, and I think he's thought, I think in his head he thought, I'm losing this round. I'm not being aggressive enough. Groves is being very aggressive, throwing that right hand, and I think he's gone to go for it, and that's where he's got caught, because he's actually got in to throw a shot, and then it's a 1-2, and then the right, and that was it. Gone and put him down. It's a great shot from George. Excellent shot.
Yeah, no, it was. I tell you what, when Groves knocked Froch down, like I said, I was talking about my wife earlier. She was absolutely ecstatic. She was loving it. She was like, I told you, Groves had put him down. I told you, he'd put him down. And she was adamant this was going to happen, and obviously he gets up, and then we get an absolutely thrilling and enthralling fight for the next 8 rounds. It was so back and forth. It was so, it was such a close fight, and you couldn't really split the two of them. I think George Groves sort of took the earlier rounds. I think the first four rounds.
I had him for the first 4. I had George quite clearly ahead on the first 4, to be fair, and he was. I actually think Froch was probably still stunned in rounds, especially through rounds 2 and into rounds. It was that much of a big shot that, and it was catching him with overhand right. Don't get me wrong, he caught him with overhand right a couple of other times during in the third, second, even the fourth, and Cole took him to he showed his granite chin. And but for me, Cole was struggling, and George just dominated him for the first 4 rounds.
So what do you think changed in that fight then? Do you think it was Groves starting to tire, emptying his gas tank on Froch with them first 4 or 5 rounds?
I don't know. I mean, the fifth round, it was. I think I wouldn't say there was a turn in the 5th round. I think the turn came in the 6th. I think in the 5th round, Froch had his most successful, and that was the round I give Froch. That's the first round I give Froch. But in the 6th round, Groves done this. He was boxing superbly. He was out. That jab was absolutely killing Froch. You couldn't get near him. The overhand right, and then for some strange reason, George Groves decided to trade with him in that 6th round, and that for me was a turning point, because Froch sort of come out on top of it a little bit for me, and I think he hurt George, and George had never been hit by anyone like that before. So that was the 6th round for me.
Yeah, I do agree. I think when he started to go toe-to-toe, that was when the difficulties came for Groves. That's when it started to become a lot harder than what it was 2-3 rounds earlier. I think when he started to take a lot more of them heavy shots from Carl Froch. Now, I've never seen Carl Froch as a one-punch concussive knockout artist. I've always seen him as, I think you'll probably agree, a guy who can throw the combinations and wear you down, and he's good at finishing his opponents, as we've seen in the past. And I think trying to trade with someone like him at that time was it wasn't the right move. But you've got to remember something we've not touched on in the lead up to this fight is actually him and Adam Booth parted ways 10 weeks before the fight.
Yep. Major problem. Do you know what? I completely forgot about that. But and he obviously got Fitzpatrick in, didn't he? But that was to do with him not going to the press conference. I think I can't quite. I think I recall George saying that Adam Booth didn't go to the presser for the Carl Froch fight, and that was why they parted ways, unfortunately. And I personally, I think that George, maybe with Adam in there, maybe he wouldn't have done what he did in the 6th round, and maybe he could have just continued to box his way through to quite a comfortable victory, to be fair, because I think that was the way it was going.
Yeah, well, that's the way it was going. As the fight got on, Groves started to tire. He started to ship too many more punches, and we get to the controversial round number 9, which is when the fight ended. And at that point, going into that round, the judges actually had George Groves ahead. One judge, the British judge, Dave Parris, had George Groves 5 rounds ahead before that stoppage.
Yep, 78-73. Yep. And then the other two was 76-75, wasn't it?
Yes. So it was a very close fight, as we was talking about. Dave Parris had it a lot wider than the other two judges, but it was quite clear that for most people watching at home and for the judges at ringside, that Groves was edging this fight. Groves was well into this fight, and then we get that flurry of combinations from Carl Froch on George Groves, and then he starts to wilt on the ropes, and then all of a sudden he starts to throw a few more combinations, and then Howard Foster felt like he'd seen enough.
And Groves hanging on here, just holding and spoiling, trying to buy some time, but Froch smells blood here.
I think Froch needs to finish it here.
It really does. Groves is in trouble. He's taken another one and another, and Howard Foster has stopped it. Wow, that is going to be controversial.
Steps in, ends the fight. George Groves is obviously complaining, he was still ready to go, and this is the big question that everybody asked, and what led to a second fight between the two of them was, could George Groves have continued?
At the time when I first watched it, I would have said no. I still, even watching it after and then watching it again before we spoke, Sean, I think he does catch him, and he does sort of turn his back on him, but I don't think he's quite gone. I think he could have I would have lasted a round, and I think he deserved that chance. He's put Carl Froch down, and the referees allowed that to happen. And I think that's where maybe Howard Foster's... He got caught up in the fight, and I think, looking at Carl, he thought... He knows probably through his career, he knows that he's got a granite chin and he can survive. I think George, not sure. So I think he's made that decision. I was disappointed, and I think a lot of people were at the time. But if he didn't do that, if he didn't make that decision, we wouldn't have been in a situation to be where we went on for the rematch. So it's interesting, isn't it? That one poor decision that many people were very upset about actually, it elevated this fight into unbelievable numbers, which we'd never ever thought were ever possible, by going to Wembley and fighting in front of 90,000 people. So in actual fact, it sort of does a U-turn, doesn't it? And Howard Foster is actually impacted on what's gone on next with AJ on the undercard at Wembley as well, and one of his, as he's coming through, it all just sort of seemed to go from this decision, really. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall. I think other referees might have let that go on a little bit longer, maybe even only for a few more seconds longer before they actually said, right, actually that's enough. Howard Foster, obviously, he felt like at the time that was the right decision to make, and as you say, that decision actually had such a significant impact on both men and boxing, and I don't think Howard Foster realises how much impact that decision he made on that night has had on boxing, because as you said again at the top of the show, it was one of the most significant fights in recent memory that's really set off the British boxing boom of the past 6 years, and obviously the rematch, which will be not so much going into detail, but obviously in the aftermath part of the show we can touch on that as well. But the fact that it was able to then generate 90,000 people, 80,000 people, as Carl Froch likes to say, 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium, George Groves coming in on an open top bus, it wouldn't have created that sort of buzz about a rematch if that decision wasn't made. I personally felt like it could have gone on a little bit longer before I would have liked to have seen it stopped, but hey, the rest is history, as they say, and we got that outcome. And what was very interesting after this fight is when they both sat down at ringside to be interviewed, the boos that Carl Froch got and the cheers that George Groves got made me realise how much George Groves had turned everything in his favour.
Oh, he done a fantastic number. He done a great job. He was really, as you say, when he came in to booze. Although, as you say, even in the build-up, people were starting to turn on Carl a little bit. But he always had a good fan base, and obviously Groves not so much. And he'd come in underdog, not really going to do much, and then he goes and puts on a performance like that. And then with the decision as well, that what Howard Foster decided to stop it as early as he did, it was unbelievable, really, how the crowd reacted. Every time Carl spoke, it was boos, wasn't it? And then it was massive cheers for George. And this shows you, what it wasn't even 12 rounds of boxing, 9 rounds, and the fans were swayed. It's quite beautiful, really.
And that leads us nicely, really, into the aftermath section of the show, and to talk about what we just touched on there. Really, was what it meant to both guys' careers, this particular fight, and it had significant impact, I think, on both men's careers for different reasons. Because we talk about Froch. Obviously, Froch had one more fight, which was the rematch against George Groves in front of them 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium, which was a massive moneymaker, which paved the way for people like Anthony Joshua to fight in front of 90,000 people at the same stadium. So this was a bit of I'd like to say it's a pioneer fight, really, for British boxing, because this pioneered and ushered in a new era where fans were from all over different sports were transitioning over just to watch these big marquee fights in such a huge stadium, because Eddie Hearn was able to work his magic and actually sell it so much that he was able to get that many people interested, and the fight itself was so significant that for me it was a big pioneering fight for recent memories.
Yeah. Did you go, Sean? I went myself. Me and my wife went.
No. You know what? I would have loved to have gone to it. But again, I watched it with my wife, and we loved it. We couldn't wait for the second fight. And again, the build up to the second fight wasn't as good as the first fight. However, it was still entertaining. It still left a lot of questions in your mind as to, can Groves do it? What ifs and buts? There was loads of them going into the second fight, and that second fight was very tentative up until the ending of that fight as well, and that wasn't as good as this first fight that we're talking about, but it was still a very good fight.
It was still a good fight, and I thought, I don't know, I could sense a shift for Carl. I think he realised he underestimated him, and he also got his family a little bit more involved in the build-up, didn't he? I think George Groves, one of his, I think Carl Froch's cousin had a little go at him, didn't he? And he was offering him out sort of at one of the presses. And you can see George was a little bit, what's going on? And I think he went over to Eddie Hearn, like, you're going to help me out? You can't have this, it can't happen. And then he's sort of laughing. And I felt a bit sorry for him there. And I think they sort of bullied him. I wouldn't say they bullied him. I don't know. I suppose they did. They sort of, he got his family involved. You could see he was up for it. He probably trained as hard as he ever trained before. He trained a lot harder, put it that way. And in his forefront, Cole's thinking, I'm going to get rid of this kid. And I think he showed his class again, which was good to see. And I think he was right to finish, Cole. For me, I think it's a good fight in front of 80,000. Or was it? I don't think it was 80. Was it knocking on 75? I don't know. But he signed off on the right one. To be fair.
Yeah, no, he did, and obviously that was the end to his career. And there was loads of talk of him coming back and having fights with people like Andre Ward, and there was so much talk of him coming back. And to be honest with you, at the age, he was 36 years old when this second fight happened, and I was more than happy for him to sign off on that. Really, I mean, I personally at the time the fight happened, I wanted George to win. I'll be honest, I wanted George to win that fight, but in hindsight, looking at what happened in both men's careers, that was a good way for Carl Froch to sign out as at the top of his game, and then for George Groves obviously to move on, and for me that's where we move on to sort of the aftermath for Groves, really, because that is another tale. That's like, this is one tale, and then we get the next tale, which is a second wind for George, wasn't it? Because we move him on, and he gets another world title shot against Badu Jack, loses that. He fights guys like Brophy, beats Martin Murray, has that fight with Edward Gusheniek, which was a significant fight for obviously George Groves because of the injuries that Gusheniek suffered afterwards, and for a lot of men that could have completely changed the way they fought. But in his next fight, he beat Fedor Chudinov finally on his 4th attempt and won the WBA super middleweight title in Sheffield.
Finally, good. I was really pleased for him that night. Obviously, I'm not going to try and pronounce the guy's name that got injured because I'm terrible with names. I don't want to murder his fella's name, but yeah, I think that impacted on George a little bit for me. That although he did go on to beat, and it was a tough fight against Fedor. Is it Fedor? Fedor. Shouldn't have, isn't it? It was a good fight, tough fight, and I thought I was really pleased for George. As you say, 4th attempt. I think he was very close at times, and he really knuckled down. And I think was it Shane McGuigan as well in his corner. I think that made a difference mentally for George, and I think he realised that he needs to. I think in his head he thought he was already there. I think he's actually said that. He has actually said that before, that he was at top of the mountain, but he hadn't been. He never won a world title, and I was really pleased for him, really pleased, and he deserved it. He deserved it, and I think a lot of people were. And then obviously on to the World Boxing Super Series after that.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's like when you think of George's career now, and you think about the Carl Froch fights, and I know them fights took a hell of a lot out of him. He eventually got that world title in his 4th attempt, but then he goes on to the World Boxing Super Series, beats Jamie Cox with a great body shot, beats Eubank Jr. after being wrote off again. I think in that fight he was kind of wrote off as, oh well, he's past his best, he's shot worn, he's damaged goods, and Eubank Jr.'s younger, fresher, is going to stop him, and he did a number on Eubank Jr. in that fight as well. And to say he had a great career was, I think, for me personally, no matter what people say, the guy has achieved a lot more than what most people will ever achieve in boxing when they turn professional.
Definitely, I do think people overlook that a little bit. I know he will always compare his record to James DeGale, which is always an interesting. They were both very good fighters. Obviously, both were tied this year, and I do think, for me, George probably did edge it, obviously, with the Froch fights as well, and with the dominant display of Eubank. Eubank was literally, I remember Nazim just killing him on ITV. He was slagging him off left, right and centre. And, I mean, rightly so, to say. Eubank didn't look great. But for me, Eubank isn't really, I think he's a little bit overrated personally anyway. But great performance from George, and I thought he was, his jab and the right, and his overhand right, and it just kept him off of him. Good footwork. As we've seen from George with low hands, and he's able to just move out of danger. It was excellent. One of his best performances, that Eubank, and it was really pleasing to see that one as well.
Yeah, it was pleasing to see that one. And he gets his final bout, and the bout he retired after, which was Callum Smith, which was for the WBA and WBC Diamond Super Middleweight titles. It was the final of the World Boxing Super Series, and unfortunately he got beat. He got stopped with what was a wicked body shot, and ironic as well that he stopped Jamie Cox 2 fights earlier with a great body shot, and practically got stopped himself with a body shot just as wicked. Yeah, it was like poetic, weren't it? It was like poetic justice. It was so strange. Like
I like that. Yeah,
it was just so strange that he'd had this second wind. He was a world champion. He looked as good as ever, beating Eubank Jr. And then he went in against Smith in a very close fight. And let's not get me wrong, he wasn't completely overshadowed in that fight. It was quite close leading up to the stoppage. I think a lot of people had it sort of, some people had it to Grove, some people had it 2 or 3 rounds up for Callum Smith, and he was in there all the way up until the end and valiantly, went out on his shield, and that's the way I always seen Groves' career going, if I'm being honest. When I talked about the Kenny Anderson fight earlier in the episode, I was saying that was a lot of fun. That fight, you should go and watch it, because that is a foreshadowing fight. Honestly, that fight, when you watch that, that will make you realise that actually Groves' career was always destined to go the way it was going to go. And if you're a believer in anything, or if the listeners are a believer in anything, I think when people say, oh, it's fate, that fight, and then looking back at his career, that was like it was meant to happen. It was so strange that his career ended the way it did, on the note that it did, and then he just had some epic fights, some great nights, and this particular one, the Froch Groves one, for me was it was his defining, although he lost on the record, it was, for me, it was one of his defining fights in his career, and which is why the voters, the users of Twitter and the listeners of the podcast voted it as a legendary night to record.
I agree with him. I agree with you as well, Sean. I think it was a good performance, a great fight, and one with, for the aftermath of what happened, it was a huge significance for British boxing. And credit to George, credit to Carl as well. It wasn't Carl's fault that Howard Foster stopped it early. So, although he got the boos, he's probably getting booed maybe because of his performance, really, not necessarily the actual decision, because it wasn't Carl's fault. If you're a fighter yourself and you're in a ring, and you've caught someone, you probably think it's been stopped early, but you've won the fight, and you're going to take it. So credit to both the guys, and really great fight. And if anyone didn't see it or anyone wants to watch it again, go and watch it again. I've watched it a couple of times since I spoke to you, Sean, and really, and credit to George, great career, great, both of them, excellent, really great fight.
Yeah, it was, and it was a brilliant fight, and it was one that will always stick out for me in living memory. If I ever think back to when I'm 70, 80 year old and I think about all the fights I've watched, this will genuinely be one of them fights where I'll always think back to and think, I remember sat on the edge of my seat watching this fight, because that is genuinely how I was watching it. I was sat on the edge of my seat watching this fight because it was so back and forth. It was one of the greatest fights we've got in recent memory, and which is why, like I said, the users of Twitter, the listeners of the podcast, voted it as one of the legendary nights to record. And I'm really pleased to have got this episode done, and I'm really glad to have got you on, Johnston, because I know you was looking forward to this one in particular.
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking me to come on, Sean. It was great sort of recapping the other night, going through the fights, and I watched the first one a couple of times. I watched the second one and the build-ups to it, and I know you touched on the George Groves little documentary that's on Sky. I watched that as well. It was great to relive it, and great pick from those on Twitter. I think I would have picked. I don't know what the other ones were, to be fair, but this is definitely one that I would have picked. But it was a great night.
So for the people that are listening to this episode of Legendary Nights, thank you so much for voting for this particular episode of Froch versus Groves 1, and thank you so much for letting us know what your thoughts are on these Legendary Nights series. We really, really appreciate it. Johnston, thank you for coming on and coming onto the episode and chatting about the fight, and it's definitely something I'd like to get you back on for in the future. And I asked you the question, and I know you're going to send it me over after we've finished this episode, but we've got another 4 fights for you, the listeners, to go on to Twitter and vote for. So if you look out on our Twitter account, which is at BTR Boxing Pod, you will find there's going to be another 4 fights popping up there very soon for you to vote on. So if you do that, vote for the next fight, we'll get it recorded, we'll get it out to you. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of BTR's Legendary Nights. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Burns is an open book for Ray Leonard. Backs up against the wall.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history